thanks so much for joining us. This is our latest interview then in the Sonicstate compilation album series. And, well, how could you not feature on this? Thanks so much for contributing. Really interesting track. So we're going to talk about the track, and we're going to talk about some of the production ideas and thoughts that you had behind it, and also a little bit of the influences, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure. Hope there's enough to talk about. I'm just thinking. Yeah, I've got all those particular topics. Yeah, the production ideas. I think there was one production idea in that which I just stretched out for a really long. No, maybe two.
No, I would say though. An overriding production value though is a fairly minimalist approach, and really focusing on letting the main synth voice take most of the sonic space. Was that a conscious decision?
Well, to be honest, I mean, the track started out somewhere completely different. Way back, I was reviewing the MFB Dominion 1, and I had to have the H9 pedal, the Eventide H9 pedal, and I created this patch in that. Now, there's a picture of me there. Look, that's actually doing it. And that's where it started, and it was just so beautiful. And I just thought that, and I lost the patch because I finished the review, and I wanted to buy a Dominion 1, and I didn't. There was no way of backing it up at the time, so I then, I think actually also that I needed to perform it live because it was the first track, the very, very, very first track that I played at the Salt Cafe, which is my first, ever synth gig. So yes. I had to make it. I made it on the Sub 37 in the end. So in terms of, I've forgotten what the original question was though, but that's where it started. It started actually as a sort of little demo, and then I had to translate it to another synth because I didn't have.
Interesting. So I guess that was going to answer my next question. What synth was that? The main voice there, and that's the Sub 37.
The main voice.
Yeah.
The main voice is the Moog Sub 37, and it's really in its full multi-drive, fully angry. I mean, that's the thing about the Sub 37; it's very hot, and that is about as hot as it gets. And it's really, because all that drive is internal. There's nothing external driving it at all.
Nice. So I mean, a big part of the appeal of the track, though, is the fact that sound really fixates you, and you are held within its tractor beam there. So the subtle movement and evolving nature of it is definitely something that I'd like to learn a little bit more about. So you augmented that then with fairly minimal percussion, bringing like the kind of the heavier 4 on the floor towards the end of the track. Is that a kind of musical direction that you naturally lean towards, the more minimal approach that I'm talking about?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, it was really necessity, to be honest, because when I was putting all of those tracks together, I had to play it. I had a BeatStep Pro, and I had to have stuff that I could actually perform. So there wasn't the opportunity to play lots and lots of things. So all that, the way that this one started out was I just recorded my performance and then built the kind of production and finessed it from that. So it was all from one take initially. And so, the minimalism is built in because I can't play that many notes. I've not got a kind of MIDI sequencer running loads of chords and stuff. So it was all very much, and really the whole of that track was about the main instrument, which is a sort of free form play thing. I mean, it got into time later, but actually, initially it didn't have any of that sort of rhythmic stuff. It was just purely, free form. So that's why it's minimal. And most of the stuff is like that, easy as well, really.
And do you find that something like the Sub 37, for instance, does kind of require a certain amount of sonic space to do the tone justice?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I never had a Moog. This is the first Moog I've ever had, because back in the day when I was doing, mixing and all that stuff, Moogs would just, and I've said this before, but like blew everything else out of the water. It made everything else sound so tiny that there was never any room. If you put a Moog in, then it would make your crappy sampler and all the other stuff just sound inadequate. So it would never have been used.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah. So this is a kind of perfect habitat for it, really, where it's being, it is.
Yeah.
The star
it's a big sound. I mean, it's got all of that kind of, masses of reverb and effects and all sorts of stuff on it at the time, which was all just stuff built into the the Behringer XR18. You know, I made that shimmer reverb out of a feedback loop and a harmonizer, I think, if I remember correctly.
Great, yeah. So regarding then influences on this track, presumably you were being more just in your own sort of headspace, but was anyone kind of particularly in mind? Did you have anyone in mind, or a particular kind of
no, not really. I mean, not really. No. I mean, I suppose the thing about this track is it started out as this sort of organic played piece, and then it didn't really go anywhere. So I kind of came. I think the second half, where it goes into the sort of rather banging and a bit sort of cheesy end, the sort of trancey, cheesy kind of techno end, was literally, I was just jamming away, and I thought, oh, this is nice, and I just sort of went. I recorded that separately, and then I sort of joined them together. Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't really. I mean, it's more rather less influence, more just kind of like, well, that will work if I do that. I suppose.
Just a sort of an organic evolution of the initial idea. Yeah, great. Okay, so I mean, when I was listening to it, then I was kind of thinking this is kind of contrasting nice. When you bring in your first percussion elements, they sounded quite organic. They sounded quite something like brushes. Were you using sort of samples for that, or where did the drums come from?
No. The first bit, is that this thing here? I'm just trying to think, because I've got the multi here, which I can
great.
bring out. I'm just trying to. It might. Are you talking? Are we talking about the same thing? So
maybe
this. Yeah. Is it this one? Yeah. That's it. Right.
Oh,
okay.
Right.
That's the mini log. No, that's the mini log. That's
right.
what that is. And I think it's running. If I remember correctly, I was clocking the mini log sequencer, and so there's motion on. I recorded motion in the mini log sequencer, which sounds like it's probably decay time and maybe the level of noise and stuff, because it does. Just trying to think what it actually. Oh, hold on, that's going to play massively. Yeah, then it, and then I bring a sync in. That's all it is, and I think what I'm doing is I'm modulating the decay time. Yeah, it sort of goes. Yeah, that's it really. I mean, there's no
really cool.
There's nothing else going on there.
Wow, yeah, I guess in the track, because of the size
tiny,
of the Sub 37, yeah, those sound really, but they sound really effective. So you said you got the multi-track there. I'm quite curious then, how much of this track was kind of made using hardware, and how much of it was using software?
Okay. Well, basically, all of it is hardware, apart from. Because what I've got here is I recorded all my different effects. So down the bottom here, the 4 tracks I've got here are the effects from the XR18. So I've got, if I play this, it's going to take a little bit sluggish to get going. So that's my sort of homemade shimmer. Then there's this early reflection, flangey chorus thing, and then there's. Sounds like the same thing. I know. And then there's this delay, on the percussion. So that's all hard. That's all hardware effects. That is. There is actually also one soft synth which is up here. This is Pigments, because when I get to the end, I needed a bit of extra doof. So what I've got here is Pigments, which is the Arturia thing. Let's see where that's going to come up. That's going to come up off screen. I'll put that here. That's right there. I put my face in as well. There we go. And all that is a really simple track. So I've got a lot of automation on it, which is also, and I added quite a lot of extra to the sub. So this is just basically, this is the Pigments track. It's just going. If I play it, it will play. Go. Oh, sorry. It's just a bit of. It's very Moog-like.
I was going to say that sounds very Moog. Yeah.
But then I'm automating because I needed this extra fizz. This is underneath, and give it the extra pulse.
Nice.
So essentially, it's kind of the same thing, but because I didn't want to record another Moog, this was all done in the box. Because What this whole thing was a longer performance that I'd then edited down into sort of something that made a bit more sense musically and was a bit less meandering, basically, because the original is probably twice as long and doesn't really kind of, there's lots of fluffs in it and what have you. So yeah, very much that. But I've also got, if I just show you there, on the Moog sub track, I've got a Filter Freak. Where I'm automating a lot of the sound because I wanted to get this, because the sound in itself is quite flat, because it's so loud and distorted. There's not much tonal movement in the sub, so I added these. Let's see if I can play these sort of filter movements.
Oh, so that's where the movement's coming from.
In many ways, yeah. So there's. Just adding, it's quite, I mean, in many ways it's sort of subtle, but it really helped kind of make it less boring.
Nice. So the fact that you're using hardware and then using a plugin like the Filter Freak from Sound Toys there is showing that you're not being you're not doing this in a kind of purist sense. No. But then what's the point in being purist? So I noticed you're using Reaper there. I mean, I always had you down as a Logic man. So
I was a Logic.
Yeah.
Well, to be honest, it was just last time I moved computers, I don't think I brought my Logic stuff. It didn't make it across, and I couldn't reauthorize it. I was a Logic user for years and years and years, and I just ended up doing it in this because it's what I had. So it was more a question of. Now that's what I use. That and Live is what I'll use. But I mean, it's not like I'm using them every day and loads. I mean, I used to be a professional Logic user. That's what my kind of. But to be honest, it's been such a long time since I've used it. I used it a lot before it changed into the sort of slightly garage bandy look. So I'm not sure how familiar I'd be with it, to be honest.
Okay, but now you've mentioned a little bit about the past. In you're saying you were a professional Logic user. Can we roll back a little bit in time then to sort of your early days? Were you in bands when you were you a band ever in bands and stuff?
I did. I was in a band at school. I think that was my first band. I played the MS-10 and sang.
Nice.
I was very bad.
Oh.
And then I got into more of that was at school, and then we sort of refined that, and it got more into a sort of getting stoned and jamming kind of band, which then ended up being Live again. And we did okay. We had our bass player was really into Mick Khan, and he had a wall bass, and it was that, all that vibe. So yeah, I did a bit of that, and then I kind of regressed into the bedroom with the 4-track eventually, and got into MIDI and that usual route, Atari and all of that kind of stuff.
So
that was the last band I was in, I would say, was a long time ago.
So because you mentioned that performance at the Salt Cafe, the first Sonicstate Live, which when was that? 2015 was it?
Yeah, it was a while back now. Well, you kind of. You instigated that. You said, "Come on, let's do it." And that was
let's get you playing live.
The amount of work that went into creating even 3 or 4 tracks from scratch.
Yeah.
I mean, I enjoyed doing it. I'm not saying, but
great.
The amount of work compared to the 15, 20 minute set, and then probably 10 minutes of that was technical issues for me, anyway.
You did then a few more concerts after that, though, didn't you? You performed at the Cymru Beats, I believe.
I did a Cymru Beats, and I did one in Synthsea, which was in Hastings with Simon Forsyth, and I did one in Winchester for Ned Rush.
Any desire, once all the restrictions are out, to get back live? Chomping at the bit to get back out there?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't missed it. I mean, the thing is, I think the amount of work it would I would probably do it even more simply. So maybe a looper and a couple of synths, not try and make something that had structure. The problem, well, it's not a problem, but I mean, I come from a pop background. I spent a lot of time working in pop music, and pop music has structure. And I always find that I have to have some sort of structure, and making structure is very difficult when you're noodling on synths. either, whether it's modular or whatever, it tends to work, which is why my other stuff has sort of gravitated more to the sort of slightly ambient kind of wafty stuff, because but it still has structure. But I think what I probably need to do is step back from even that level of structure. And the thing about this track and some of the other tracks I do, it's all about the melody and the tune in the main line, rather than just a simple basic repetitive riff, of which this does have some of that as well. But there's a bit more, improv, but around a basic theme.
Nice. So, I mean, you've actually then applied a little bit of that pop now in the editing process with this, though, in sort of just chopping and kind of giving it a little bit of the form there. So, just in terms of your muse, then, are you feeling quite inspired at the moment? How's lockdown affected your ability to play? No,
not so much. If I'm honest, no, not really. And I think it's just because things change. There's so much other stuff that changes, just the way that we run Sonic and the way that things have to happen. There's all this other stuff floating around that you have to think about, the mechanics of it. And so I've been less inclined to be creative. I mean, I think I did this over Christmas or just before Christmas to try and finish it off, because I wasn't sure whether I was going to start something from scratch and I saw this and I thought, yeah, I reckon I could do something with this. And I enjoyed that whole process. But it wasn't really me. I didn't write. Well, I didn't write any more parts in it. I was more sort of arranging it. So, but in terms of inspiration at the moment, I'm not really feeling it at the moment. But I'm old enough to know that these things go up and down. So maybe I'll that'll come back to me again, or I hope so. And also, when you're reviewing things, you're not always reviewing something that enables you to have a creative spark. It might be more technical, so therefore it doesn't necessarily make you go, oh wow, I've just come up with this riff on a 4-track recorder or whatever it may be. So it doesn't always work.
Do you find that you need a certain set of circumstances to be able to work musically in the proper sort of right brain creative zone? Do you need to kind of set aside specific time for that in order for it to work properly?
Not always, because part of my job, if I am reviewing a synth, part of my job is to try and get some musical substance out of it or connect with it in some way. So that's all part of that process. It doesn't always transpire that what I come out with I'm particularly feeling. It might be enough to demonstrate the synth, or the instrument, but it might not be something that makes me go, I've got to develop that and get going. But if I do get to that situation, I'll just record something. I mean, or I've got it in the video and I'll come back to it, maybe save a patch if I need to, and I might come back to it and adjust later. So it doesn't necessarily, part of the everyday job, assuming I am reviewing instruments. I mean, because I reviewed when we did the MC707, I did a Friday Fun Jam, and I developed a sequence for that, and I really enjoyed that. That was a kind of a creative moment and a process there, which is very different to what this is. But I think, it just comes about. Sometimes when I'm doing a review, it's nice to have a partially or more fully formed musical idea to hang the review on, because I find people tend to respond much more positively to a review which has some musical relevance. Maybe they don't like, my particular style of music, but if there's a tune in there, they can kind of go, oh yeah, that's kind of I quite like the melody, or whatever it may be. It helps them maybe feel the same way that I felt about reviewing that piece of equipment, so they get some sense that it inspired somebody to do something. That's kind of part of, so I suppose it's part of the everyday job.
Yeah, nice. I was kind of asking that in a way because I myself feel like I have two modes of working in sort of the technical side and then my creative side feel very sort of separate from each other. I find it quite hard to access that. If I'm in the one headspace. Maybe that's just me. But so just we'll just talk a moment then a little bit about some of your kind of landmark instruments. Now you mentioned the MS-10, and I know you've got an MS-20 there, I think, as well, haven't you? Those are instruments.
I haven't used it for years, but I do have one.
Mm-hmm. And that's been quite, the MS-20 I know you've mentioned before has been quite a pivotal instrument. What other kind of instruments have been your long-term kind of go-tos or, reliable inspiration sources?
I think that's changed, to be honest. I think it changes down to circumstance and down to what is available, what's working. I mean, it used to be my main synth setup used to be Juno 106, MS-20, Monopoly, and probably a base station in terms of synths. I mean, I had JV1080, O&W, the sort of meat and potato. I sort of tend to think them in different categories. So the character instruments were those, and then the replacement would be I might have an O&W which does the pianos and strings and things that require polyphony and just that sort of stuff that was required. Then it went to a JV1080, and that was so there were those. I have the O&W still. In fact, I used it just the other day. It was just here because
really?
I had to get an M1 kind of piano sound up. It's completely dead. All the presets, when you flip presets, all you get are the raw PCM sounds. There's no programming. So you got piano is like a piano note on, off, no filter, no envelope. But I had to do it because I had to remake a multi-track for something from ages ago. So in terms of but what I reach for now. It's different, I think. I mean, I as you know, I really like the Dreadbox stuff, and I think that's partly because it's small and I can just pop it here or pop it there. When I've got to kind of hoof a massive instrument and get it, and it takes up loads of space, I've got to clear all the room for it. It's convenience, I suppose. But I mean, I've got a Jupiter 6, which I absolutely love, but it's massive and it doesn't really have anywhere permanent that's where it's set up. So, but. I mean, Landmark Kitchen, I think it's what speaks to you at the time, doesn't it? I mean, like I say, I love the Dreadbox. I loved the Erebus for a long time, and that was part of, it wasn't used in this particular track, but it was something I was using around the time that I made the tracks that I was performing live. And it's just things that have a bit of something about them, I call it charisma or whatever it may be, something that when you just kind of go, you play a note, you go, oh, that's nice. It's not like you have to work really hard to get something that's pleasing. You might have to work hard to get something you actually specifically want from it, but the raw sort of building blocks are the things that appeal to me, I think.
Yeah, great. So, I mean, we mentioned at the top about how the Sub 37 is kind of claiming staking out a lot of the sort of sonic territory for itself. Is there a particular instrument that you find really good for making multiple tracks with?
I use the other Dreadbox, the Typhon. I use that quite a lot. Okay. And I did when I was doing what's the review I did recently? The Verse Lab, the MV1, the Roland Verse Lab. I was using that to lay down quite a lot of little bits because it was just, again, it's kind of small. This is weird. I mean, I have a very weird kind of requirement because if I'm reviewing something this big and the camera's on it, I don't really want something this big next to it to sample it. I need something a bit smaller, you know what I mean? So that it doesn't overpower it visually. It's a really bizarre kind of criteria. So I use the MV1. I'm using the Korg NTS one sometimes as well. I quite often reach for that, although that's a bit of a pain because every time you plug a lead into it, the lead is generally heavier than the unit and it tends to flop about, and getting MIDI in and out of it is a drag, and it hums over USB power, but I like that because it's got this sort of but it's got that sort of, both of those instruments have got built-in effects, and I like that because I can pick it up and just dial in a sound world without going, all right, I need to plug it into a mixer, then I need to send an effect, because most of the effects these days that I have are in the box, and I'm not really working in the box until afterwards. So at the time, I like things that have effects in them so that I can, fill a space without having to get too complicated technically.
And print with the effects on, commit as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, if the effects are on the synth, then you generally want to have, you record that whole thing, I guess. I mean, that's what I would do, generally speaking. I mean, I didn't hear, like I said, on this multi, I recorded the effects separately as individual stems, because you can do that on the, on the XR18. It's quite easy.
Yeah, great. I mean, I was thinking just back then with a question I was just leading with. I've used the DeepMind 12 quite a lot for building up lots and lots of tracks, and it works really, really well when you've got many, many instances of it stacked, and somewhat mitigates criticism of it not sounding necessarily the fattest of synths. I was just kind of curious if there was how you'd go about that sort of thing, how you make space for other instruments, whether you use a lot of bandpass filtering or other things to try and
well, you're
keep
asking.
things...
I understand your question, but you're asking the wrong guy, because I don't tend to layer that much stuff up. As you heard in that track and the other tracks, most of it is sort of maybe 3 or 4 instruments tops. There's never really more than that in my own music, because. Right. I don't really have the patience to sit and build something in the DAW. I like it to be, if it's happening in front of me and I can tinker with all of the things. So it's whatever I can plug in. So I tend, with and that's followed through with things like I do on those sort of Friday fun jams. It's like a couple of synths, So I'm not building that stuff up. So I wouldn't necessarily know, because I'm just not doing that. I mean, I could guess at what might work. I mean, DeepMind I could imagine would work, but only because it is quite skinny when you in its rawness. I mean, when you start building the effects up, it takes a lot of space, and you can get it to sound fairly beefy if you've got a few, if you unison it and whatnot. But in terms of building multi-layered stuff, I mean, that's just not something I'm doing now. I mean, it's gone are the days of these sort of epic productions, and I suppose I'm not so keen on sitting in front of a computer and building a track up in terms of lots and lots of layers. I kind of like the idea of just coming up with something that pleases me, that I can play with my hands or put into a sequencer and play, a riff over a basic riff. So it's usually much more simplified than that. So I'm just not the right person to ask.
Oh, no, that's a great answer. That's a perfect answer. So, I mean, I'm just kind of curious, really, because you, following the massive hit of Tom Steiner, DNA, I'm sure most of the audience will know that was actually you. You got offered a lot of and did a lot of remix work.
Yeah.
How did that remix kind of mentality, how did you approach that? Were you trying to put your stamp on things, or were you really trying to climb into the song and see what you could get out of it and be truer to the artist's vision? Or how, what was your general approach for remixing?
I suppose it's very similar. I mean, I wanted it to be, I didn't want things to be generic in my own mind, even though I'm sure they ended up that way, because that was the time when things were generally generic. And I think, again, it's like reviewing a synth. I would play and noodle until I found something that just kind of set me off, and then we'd go, and you'd go, okay, this groove feels right. We can build on that. It needs this, that, and the other. I mean, I'm sure back then we spent far too long on things, because we weren't the sort of people who were, musically or technically particularly experienced. So things would take a long time, And I think that was the thing when things started to get into the, okay, if we're doing this for a living and we need to bang these out one after the other, that's when my interest started to fade off, because I didn't feel like it felt a bit more like a hack, and I didn't really want to do that, I suppose. I did it for a bit, and then it didn't bring me any joy. It was just hard work, because it's creating music, whether or not in some ways, it's harder if you don't particularly like the track you're working on, because you've just got to get it done, and you're not, it's like you're giving it this stuff that you maybe don't feel it deserves. And it sort of feels a little bit, it doesn't feel like a good use of energy, and that's what I felt like back then. I mean, it sounds a bit spiritual, but we all like to do what we want. And I suppose the thing is, we're lucky, and working in music, everybody, I think, assumes that you get to do whatever you want and you follow your muse. But quite often you'll get a brief, particularly if you're working to media, and people go, I want it to be like this. And so you have to make it like that. And you can get a bit of yourself in there, but that's not what you're being asked for necessarily. So you might find that some of the stuff is a bit painting by numbers, but that's what years of experience, people who do this all the time, are able to do. They're able to make it interesting enough for them to do the job, and also quick enough so that they don't kind of sweat blood and tears too much over it, and hopefully they get relatively well reimbursed for that. That's the magic. We can't all just kind of go, what, I'm just going to do this and play something, and everybody goes, wow, that's amazing, we'll have that. I mean, some people can do that, but most people have to compromise. And that's difficult. Compromising art is hard.
Yeah, 100%. So the rise in recent years of MPE very much plays into this performing and capturing the performance at the source. do you see yourself exploring more kind of MPE options? I know that's something we have talked about quite a bit in the past.
Yeah, maybe actually. I mean, maybe the next bunch of sounds, because then I can introduce a lot more expression, even if it's just one sound. I mean, I think the hard thing with MPE is it becomes a more complex setup, because either you have to have a computer involved because most MPE controllers are USB based. They don't just spit out MIDI into a DIN in which you plug into something else, because if it has a DIN, there aren't all that many MIDI DIN equipped instruments that would accept an MPE input over MIDI DIN. So, but I have been using the retro kits, the RK006, which is this little thing here. And so I can plug the little mini Roly Seaboard, whatever it is, the little Seaboard block, which is like an octave or an octave and a half. And you can plug that into here and then route that to hardware, stuff like the Hydrasynth and things like that. So it's possible, yeah, because I mean, the only thing I find with MPE is I'm not really, I don't play a lot. And those kind of movements which MPE invite and individual finger movements are quite physically demanding, and they kind of hurt after a while. So I'd need to get my chops up. Maybe I'll be able to review one of those Osmos keyboards, and then I can do something with that. That would be the nice thing, because that I'm looking forward to that if that time comes.
Yeah, I mean, because thinking about your track in a way, that was my first thoughts were you using something like the Touche for adding the expressivity, but it turns out you'd done it in good old fashioned automation. But
well, it wasn't just automation. There was there's stuff happening, and that's not just me playing. There's a sound that evolves over time, and I can't remember exactly how it's put together. So there is. I think I was using the mod wheel to bring in one of the oscillators that was high, that was creating that extra, even more growl. So there is a performative aspect to it, but yeah, I don't record. There's not any aftertouch in that particular track, as far as I know.
Okay, so returning to the track, then you mentioned that about capturing that performance and again featuring that the Sub 37 as the main instrument. But how many tracks are actually going on in the project in total? What else is going on?
Let's have a look. So I've got Sub 37 up there, which is a single mono track with some automation on it. There's the mini log, which is the percussive element. There's the Dominion 1 actually, which is
it did make an appearance.
This is this. It's beefy as hell. But what I did with this, actually, interestingly, is I stuck I've got a transient master on it, so it's giving it an extra bit of bite. So if I take, and I've got the passive EQ, so take that all off. So yeah, I got a transient master, and it's giving it a bit more. So I processed some of this stuff quite a lot.
That's interesting. So what I was hearing when I thought I heard like some sort of organic drums going on, it was a combination of that and the mini log then. So that transient master put in a little bit of a front on that sound. Gives it a little bit of a...
Yeah, so...
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that is the rhythm track. I mean, you could argue that is actually the rhythm track, couldn't you?
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm processing it. So what's that? That's three things. Then there's the circuit, which doesn't actually come in until later, and I don't think it's actually as loud as distorted as this. I think I might have done something since. So there's two tracks of circuit, but the main beat is just. I really over processed that because I wanted to. Let's have a look. Neutron. I just typed neutron. I thought I had that in. Maybe I did have it on. Have I bypassed it? Oh no, here we go. So I've got EQ, and I'm really giving it a bit of a wallop there. And that's actually a mix of that's a mix. That's the whole thing. And I think that happened later on in the track. And I think actually the other thing is the tempos are slightly different from the two different sections I created. So I had to make this edit work somehow that way. So I'm using it there, and then I think I've got a little bit of other circuit, which is just without the kick in it. Let me see what that sounds like. Yeah.
Was that kick? Was the kick coming from the circuit then?
Kicks coming from the circuit, yeah.
Yeah,
it was all built into the same thing. And then the rest is effects. That's it. That's all there is. There's nothing else.
So, which artists would you kind of cite as influences for sort of guiding your textural and sonic approaches to things? Ooh. Are there any? Yeah.
I don't know, really. I mean, the artists that I'm going to be, if I start sort of quoting loads of the formative stuff of my years, I'm just going to sound like an old fart who's stuck in the 80s. So I'm going to refrain from doing that. But I really like stuff that Alessandro Cortini does. His kind of pop stuff is really good. There's a track that he did when it was on the Sonorio, when he was doing that project, that was just enough. It was called, and it is the most intense sort of just pop track, but it's absolutely crammed full of stuff, and I still have no idea how he mixed it, because it's all in the mid-range. It's an astonishing piece of work. I hear things that I like, and I suppose I clock them, and then maybe I'll try and introduce some of that into what I do. I mean, my influences are probably more limited by my lack of playing ability and my falling back on playing in the same keys and the same modes and stuff more than anything else, than perhaps particular artists. But all the usual suspects. I mean, I probably started off listening to, like a lot of kids my age, I probably started off listening to heavy metal like AC/DC and Aerosmith, when I was probably 10. Then I got into early synth pop, so Yazoo and Vince Clarke and early Depeche Mode. Yeah, this is all sort of pop influences. And punk, I went through punk. The Clash were big, and also with lots of Weather Report and Frank Zappa and all of that. So quite a wide range of influences, I suppose.
Yeah,
I like to think so. I mean, I'm not fully stuck in a rut, totally. Anyway.
Wow. So. What have you got coming up then, Nick? I know that you're saying that you're finding it busy, but with Patreon and whatnot, anything that you can let us know what's happening?
Well, I mean, in terms of music, like I say, I haven't had an awful lot of creative urges recently. I mean, I try and get some stuff up, and I try and put things that I do on Patreon, just to sort of, just because people seem to be interested in that. But I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing what people make of this album. There's so much stuff on it. I mean, the only problem is you hear some of the tracks and you just think, maybe I should go back and do some more work on mine, because it's not really up to scratch compared to some of this. Some of this stuff is amazing. I mean, well, it's all amazing, but some of it is really amazing. I can't wait to see what people make of it.
Okay, well, thanks ever so much, Nick, for taking part in this interview, and I guess I'll see you on Sonic Talk soon. Bye.
I hope so. See you later.